And instead, it tends to confuse because we cannot change the format of it. We cannot add words to it. It is prescribed, and we have to publish it in that way. But we are going to talk today, and some of the previous slides spoke to the information required, but to meet that education code and also to meet the truth in taxation requirements, we advertise that in the local newspaper. And then at the same time, we put this proposed budget on our website. And this one is a little quirky, but it is compliant. So you'll notice that the first column there refers to the 2020-2021 budget as it stood as amended in August when we published this budget for 21-22. And there's nothing wrong with those, but they don't always tell the best story of comparison because you've amended the original budget throughout the years. And I'll give you an example for things such as one-time expenditures, such as $2.5 million, when in fact if you lined up recurring expenses, that would not be how it came out. So I just wanted to point that out because it does appear to be a little bit quirky in the way that it's presented. As I mentioned earlier, there is a reduction recommended and calculated in the maintenance and operation tax rate down to 96.03 from $1.02. But if you remember nothing else from tonight, please remember that there are two pieces of the tax rate, two components of the tax rate, and it is really important that you understand the difference between those two. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. The total tax rate that we're recommending is $1.4303. And pretty much anyone that receives a tax bill, and I'm guilty myself, if I weren't in the profession that I'm in, I would not do anything different, but go to the bottom right-hand side where there's a bold black box that says what your total tax bill is. And oftentimes people don't understand the components that make that up, and it's not because they don't want to understand it, they just don't have a need to. They know how much they've got to pay, and they don't really understand the different components. And so my responsibility tonight is to make sure that for the little MISD piece of that our citizens understand the difference between those two tax rates. That 9603 is called the maintenance and operation tax rate, but it's also referred to as the general fund. And it really is what funds the day-to-day operation of the school district. And then on the right, that interest and sinking is also called the debt service fund, and that is 47 cents. And we'll talk about that separately. It's a separate budget as well as a separate piece of the tax rate. But first, let's talk about the general operating fund, also known as Fund 199. We want to give you as many names as possible for it. But that, again, funds the day-to-day operation of the district and campuses. It's funded by that 96 cents, as well as the combination of that in the state funding formulas. So we receive state funding, we receive our local property taxes, and then just a smattering of other revenues that come from different sources that we'll also address in a moment. But when you talk about the Fund 199, the general fund, however you want to refer to it, if you hear people talking about educational budget cuts or cuts in the budget, or you read in the newspaper about the budget, this is the one they're talking about because this is the mass majority of all of different school districts funding. There are other funds that are dedicated purpose funds that come with strings attached. They already tell us how we can spend the money, and so the board doesn't adopt those because they've already got that criteria around them, whereas the board adopts this general fund along with the tax rate that supports it. And by law, and by Texas Education Code, we actually have you adopt this by the functional level, and it's all those pieces that fit together to support our students' experience. The reason that the law is written that way is it makes us comparable with other districts across the state so that we all have the same framework and the same structure in our account codes, so that when we report a teacher's salary, that we're reporting it in function 11, and when we report Mr. Gallagher's salary, we have it in function 41, and when we report Mr. Gage's salary, it's in function 51, and so forth. And so that makes us all 1,000+ districts across the state comparable when everyone interprets their coding in the same way. But if that's really your thing and you want to drill down into those functions over the next 2 months, you'll have more of an opportunity to do that. We will have that on our website by function that will tell you the definition of each function and how many employees are funded from that function. That's just something that I've done over the years that we are going to be working to push out there after we get the budget adopted and the year closed. So don't panic, y'all. We'll get that out there soon. But really, to me, to put it more in context, which is what this hearing is about, is helping our public to understand our budget process. To put it more in context of that, rather than talk about it by function and individual function, I wanted to talk about it in the big categories that we have, the big 4 categories that we have. And that is that the majority of our budget is in personnel and payroll, as it should be. We're an extremely labor-intensive industry, full of human capital, again, as it should be, because the most important thing that we do is invest in the teacher that stands in front of that class. And everything else that we do and every other person that we pay has a direct correlation to that. They're either supporting the learning of that teacher to make that experience better for a student, they're keeping the buildings clean and safe, or they're meeting compliance in other ways, like many of us do in central office. But of our budget, of the entire almost $84 million that we're recommending, about 78% of that is invested in the salary and the benefits related to the human capital. And that even seems a little bit low whenever you look at it in a comparability across the state, but there's a reason for that. And all of the districts have different caveats. And so if you're really, a data junkie and want to go out and look at it, you'll see that our 78% is a little bit lower. Well, it's not because we aren't investing in the same things that other districts are. It's because we have some contracted, much like other districts do, that we pay in 6200s instead of in 6100. So as you know, we have partnerships and contracts where we pay Gold Star for our transportation staff, and we pay ESS for our substitute staff, and we pay our cities for our SROs. So those are all human capital that are also invested in, but they're invested through 6200 contracted services. And so that's prescribed for us in that way. And so those are, our SROs are about 1% of our budget. Our substitutes are about 1.2% of our budget, and our transportation is about 3.5% of our budget. But those are in that 15% of the overall. But in addition to that, and the reason I always put utilities slash, if you look this up in Texas Education Code, it'll define it as contracted services. But people that are reading it don't really comprehend what all that means, because it also does include utilities, and that's a large portion of it. And so keeping our buildings clean and keeping our buildings heated and cooled and clean from the trash and water and so forth, of our entire budget, 3.5% is spent on utilities. And so those are included in this category. And then still more in the contracted services area are some of the outsourced things that we do. Every now and then we come across something that our maintenance staff isn't going to handle, that we're going to contract with a company to come in and take care of, some air conditioning units or whatever it may be. We also contract some things for technology or internet lines, telephone lines. All of those things are included in our copier contracts, are included in the 6200s as well. And so all total, those are 15% for all of those areas. And then I think it's always a little bit surprising that tangible supplies are such a small portion of our budget. Only 4% of our budget is spent on supplies and materials. And so tangible supplies like textbooks, paper, certificates, computer technology, the actual devices, down to the pencils, and then also things for like sporting equipment or fine arts equipment, instruments, things like that. Now, part of that is because we're a growing district and we have bond programs that address some of those pieces as we build new buildings. But really, that's not a lot different across the districts in the state. And it's one of the most misperceived pieces, is that schools spend a lot of money on stuff. I always say that it kind of follows the same. Now, you wouldn't know it by looking in their rooms whenever they were growing. I say it's not the stuff that we invest, it's the experience that we give them. And it's the same thing. It's not about the stuff that we give our students. It's about the experience we provide them, putting that human capital in front of them and reinvesting in it as well. And then the final classification is 6,400, and that really is kind of the intangibles, if you will. It's the fees, the travel, the other things. Insurance is about 1% of our entire budget. And so of that 3%, insurance makes up a third of it. Travel is another one of those hot topics that sometimes someone will abuse somewhere in the state, and so it gets all of this attention in the newspaper. That's 0.8% of our entire budget, and that includes student travel. And so when you think about every place that they go for a field trip or getting to a competition or a game, so about 0.8% is that, and then the other percent is attributed to fees such as UIL fees, entry fees, dues to organizations. There's a multitude of different things in that category. And then interestingly, food is part of 6,400 as well. So it's definitely not intangible, but I guess when we eat it, it is classified here. So it should be in human capital, and then even part of that 15% is invested in people. If you look at it from a dollar standpoint instead of a percentage, if that's your thing, then there is the dollar breakdown in each one of those stated in dollars. As just kind of an overall summary of the things that are included in our budget that might be a little different from 2021, because the base was the 2021 budget. But we also have included here from the action that you took on July the 19th to roll that 3% stipend into base salary. We have additional positions that were approved this spring. I hear an amen from Ms. Brown over there. And 2% midpoint salary increase, so that we did some studies and found out that we were lagging in some of the areas of our salary. And so we've applied those. And then we've also built into the budget an allocation for year one of a 3-year market equity adjustment that will be applied during the year, where we're really going to go in and make sure that we have existing employees that are at the equitable salaries that they should be. And then really unrelated to the compensation plan and adjustments necessarily, but it also includes an operational contingency. And so those are just noteworthy things within the budget. Just making sure that we take care of both recruitment and retention of our staff. I mentioned the revenue earlier. The revenue estimates are calculated the same for all 1,040 regular districts, and now some number of charters as well, that we all use the same state funding template, but we get different answers from that because the data that we provide in our estimates of what our year is going to look like is going to produce different data. So the key is, of course, on student attendance, and not student enrollment, but student attendance. It's always frustrating to me that we have to staff on enrollment projections, but we are funded on attendance instead of enrollment. And so there's sometimes a variant between those two, and it's just part of our process. And then, of course, if you have special populations, from anything from special education services to gifted and talented to low socioeconomic needs, and a variety, and as a summary, much like I did for the expenditures, they include our demography report for projections of enrollment, our attendance rate at some historical levels, included in the budget as well. So our local property taxes plus local income from gate receipts and little bitty bits of interest income. That's about 72% of our revenue. And then we get, but then also from the federal government, we receive about 3%, mostly through impact aid because we're on the lake, and then also through our SHARS program. And SHARS is our school related services, I think is the right acronym for SHARS, and it's where we are serving students that are eligible for Medicaid. And so that program then reimburses the district for those services that we provide to those students after intensive reporting to do so. And then again, I think I've already mentioned this to you, the calculation of the tax rate documents have to now be attached to the budget and become a part of that process. That meets not only the Texas tax code, but the truth in taxation regulations as well. And so those will be attached there. And then in just full summary of that cover sheet that you have that has the 3 funds that a board will consider for adoption at a meeting later tonight, you have the $83,931,581 general fund. And you should know that number that I don't do a whole lot of rounding. So we're very specific in that. And that is a balanced budget. Now you can bet that the actual revenue did not come out exactly the same as the actual expenditure. So the adjustment for that to be a balanced budget, because there was very little difference, does flow into my contingency. And so the general fund there is presented for you. Kind of reminder, because I've been talking for a while now, that there are two parts to the tax rate. And what I just shared with you about the $83 million, almost $84 million, is supported by that one side, the maintenance and operation 96 cents. And the other side is our debt service, also known as interest and sinking, is that 47 cents. And again, that is a pure calculation. That portion of the budget is $28 million, and it is purely to repay the debt that has already been approved by the voters through bond elections. We cannot do anything else with that money. And that is often, again, one of the most misperceived pieces of school funding is, well, why are y'all building these buildings if you can't give, our teachers a raise or whatever, fill in the blank it may be? And it's because we're legally bound from doing that. It's two separate funds and it's two separate calculations. And the one for debt service, the 47-cent rate, is purely a calculation that we are able to manage our debt portfolio from those things that we have issued and look at the amortization across that. So you also have an agenda item later tonight at the other meeting tonight for doing just that and managing our portfolio to keep our tax rate at the 47 cents, so that we have the capacity, we have the opportunity to refund and to redeem some of our portfolio. That also then creates pockets of portfolio accessibility when we issue new bonds. We still have an ongoing bond program and ongoing needs with that. So that is in numerical order, but this one I did in tax rate order. So that's the 20 far side there. Also a balanced budget. And then the final budget that we're asking for you to consider is the student nutrition budget. It is about $5.2 million. We adopt this one because as opposed to some of the other federal funds that I mentioned, we don't adopt because they come with specific strings on how you can spend that money. But as we are participants in the National School Lunch Program, also known as NSLP, we have to adopt this budget, or the board has to adopt this budget. And it encapsulates and includes all of the labor for our cafeteria staff, as well as the food or the non-food, anything related to running our cafeterias. This year, and USDA commodities that are donated, or not donated, but that are granted to us. We recognize both the revenue and the expenditure for that as well. Interestingly, this year, the K through 6, I believe it is, students will eat at no cost. Is it K through 6, I think? Pre-K 12, oh, the entire district will eat for free. And so we had to do a lot of estimates on food because we don't have a lot of history on that. Just because you provide it doesn't mean that everyone will partake in it. However, it sounds like we started out with a pretty big participation in our first week last week. Alfred, did you say more than 20,000 meals? Yes, and just last week. And so I say all that to let you know that I fully expect to come to you with an amendment to the Student Nutrition Fund as we gain more information on how that's being assessed this year. It will be balanced because we'll be getting reimbursement for that from the government as well. And so I also do want to give a shout out to the nutrition staff. Mr. Gacious did that earlier today in our cabinet, and I just think they are very underappreciated, not by intent, but we just often just, they're magic and it just appears. And there's a lot of hard work that goes behind that. And we so appreciate all that they do for our students and our staff. Middle portion of your summary sheet on the front, that's our Fund 240, our Student Nutrition Fund of $5.2 million. That was also included in the compensation plan adjustments that you approved earlier in the year and on July the 19th. And that was a whole lot of words, but I'm done. And then if you have any questions, I'll first take questions from the board. Anything?
No, thank you very much. We'll go on this in general session, but is there any questions or comments?
I have a question about the reimbursement for the food.
Mhm.
So, what?
Yeah.
So we get reimbursed for pre-K through 12 for the student meals, just the food from the federal government?
There's a calculated meal cost.
Okay.
And so the calculation of that meal cost, just as it is, even if it was only those that signed up and qualified, there's a calculated meal cost that we're reimbursed. So it includes the entire cost at a set price for the
For
meal.
students who would have or who would not have.
Who would not have qualified, right, right. So it really just expanded what the qualification requirement to any student that attends. Okay. All right, any questions from the public?
But specific to this.
So yeah, specific to the budget. And this is, we're still within the budget hearing, and the board will consider the published proposed tax rate later tonight, tax rate and budget. But if there are no questions, then I'm done with the budget hearing portion.
So I say citizen input.
Not for the public hearing. Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Adams, thank you so much for a thorough budget hearing. Appreciate it very much.
All those in favor? I have. I have 627.